Hi, I'm Jeremy, the Zoo Nerd, coming to you live from Los Angeles, California, where today it's a little bit cloudy, a little bit cool, and a little bit rainy. Hope you're all doing well. Hope you're having a good day. Hope that you're being happy despite what may be going on around you. Today in our Critter Chat, we're going to be talking about one of the most dynamic and exciting groups of birds, the penguins. Now, I didn't know for a very long time that there are many different kinds of penguins. I knew that there were a couple because I had seen some different sized penguins when I had been to different places, mostly zoos or aquariums. But I had no idea. There are 18 different species of penguins. Now, there's some things that are pretty common between all those species, and there's also some pretty unique differences between several of the species. Today we're going to do an overview talking about a lot of those differences and some of those similarities. So first of all, let's talk a little bit about where penguins live. They entirely live in the southern hemisphere, with one tiny exception, and that's the penguins that live in the Galapagos Islands. How many of you knew there were penguins there, huh? But those penguins, the islands are located right near and around the equator. So technically, some of them live north of the equator. But aside from the Galapagos species, all the other species are well into the southern hemisphere, south of the equator. But they do not all live in Antarctica. They don't all live in cold, snowy places. Some of the places they live are actually quite nice temperature-wise. And sometimes they have really nice beach homes that they live in and go to every night. Versus some of their colder water relatives that live further south and in much more cold, extreme environments. They also vary quite a bit in size. The littlest penguins, which are sometimes called little penguins, sometimes called blue penguins, sometimes called little blue penguins, and sometimes called fairy penguins. They're only about 16 inches high. So they are pretty small little guys. I have seen them in a zoo setting at the Cincinnati Zoo in Ohio, and I was absolutely amazed by them. They resemble their much bigger cousins quite a bit, other than that instead of black, they're kind of a navy blue color, which is really cute and cool. And they're tiny, and they have a lot of penguin attitude, which is also pretty fun and exciting. I've also seen the largest kind of penguins, which are emperor penguins. They have those in SeaWorld in San Diego, and that is where I have seen them. Although they are one of the few places in the world that has them outside of their Antarctica home. Now, the emperor penguins can be about 45 inches tall, so that's about this high compared to me. They are definitely very large birds, to say the least, and they can weigh almost 90 pounds compared to those little guys that weigh only about 2 pounds. So pretty big size difference between some of the penguins. Most penguins kind of fall into that medium range, weighing in about 20 to 30 pounds and are about 20 to 30 inches tall. Penguins are absolutely sea-dwelling birds. They rely on the ocean. That is where they get their food. All penguins eat food in the ocean. No exceptions to that. So they will eat some variety in the ocean. Most of them will eat fish. Some of them eat krill. Some of them eat shrimp or crabs. And sometimes they'll eat other things like squid. One research project that they were studying with the little blue penguins, they found that they were eating jellies quite a bit. Sea jellies or jellyfish. Quite a bit of the time, which was kind of undocumented before then. They felt that they were maybe turning to eat jellies because some of their other food supplies were running low. Penguins also have a lot of great adaptations for living a life in and around water. They have kind of very stiff flippers. Those would be wings in other birds, but since penguins don't fly, they use them more for swimming. They are sometimes called flippers. They're muscular or bone structure of the flipper is identical to any other bird species wing. It's just a little shorter and flatter with the bones. They also have webbed feet, kind of think like a duck, but they're a little more squishy, and they have a little more mass to them. So their toes in their webbed feet are a little more bumpy than a duck's would be. They also have a very special oil gland that they use to preen or clean their feathers, and that helps to keep them waterproof, and that helps to insulate them. It actually helps trap a layer of air into their feathery covering, and that helps keep them warm, especially important to those very cold water dwelling penguins of Antarctica. Now, penguins all kind of have the same basic colors on their bodies. They are usually black, except for the little blues that are navy blue, on their back, and white on their front. Now, some have some spots, some have some stripes, some have some little decorative feathers up on top. Those are usually yellow or orange. Some have different colored bills or beaks and different colored eyes. But the black and the white is pretty common among all the species. And there's a very, very important reason for that. It's not just so they look cool and look like they're wearing little tuxedo suits. It's something that scientists call counter shading. So when the penguins are in the ocean swimming, or if you've ever seen them swim at like an aquarium, they always swim kind of on their belly with their face forward, their flippers, their feet at the back, and their wings out to the sides. That's how they swim in the water. And when they're swimming like that, their white belly is pointed down and their black back is pointed up. So if there's a predator nearby, and if it's above them looking down, if you look down in deep water, that's really dark water, that's shadowy, that's hard to see anything that is also dark. So that black back would help camouflage them from any predators up above that are looking down on them. And the same is true if the predator's underneath them looking up. The surface of water when you're under deep water is always very light at the surface level, and that white belly would help them camouflage against the surface of the water for any predators that are looking up at them. So very cool adaptation called counter shading. And there's a lot of other animals that have counter shading as well, but penguins are one of the best examples of that. They can also swim quite fast, about 15 miles an hour. That's pretty good swimming. That's definitely faster than humans can swim. And to help them go faster, they can do something called porpoising, where as they're swimming, they'll actually come up out of the water and then dive back in. And that change between going through air and going through water helps increase their speed. And so if they are traveling as a group to get out to food, that can often be the case. Or if they're trying to get away from predators, that is also something that's very important for them. It's called porpoising. And they get that name from porpoises, which are like dolphins, cousins of dolphins. But there's a lot of animals in the ocean that can swim that way. Sea lions, for example, are another good example of an animal that porpoises. That's their type of swimming that they can do. Penguins must come on shore to lay their eggs and to raise their chicks. Now, for some species, they come on shore every night to sleep. For a lot of species, they only come on shore to raise their chicks and have their babies and to molt their feathers. They kind of do all those things at one time frame, and they're sometimes on land during that time for a couple of months straight. The ones that come on shore every day, they can usually lay their eggs, and maybe one will stay home and babysit the chicks while the other one goes out and looks for food. But they must lay their eggs and have their babies on land. And that's because when the babies are first hatched from their eggs, remember they're birds, so all these bird things are true with them, other than they don't fly. But when they hatch their eggs, the babies are very fluffy and covered in very soft down. You've probably seen pictures of that. I'll be putting some up on the Facebook page later as well. But those fluffy feathers, they can't keep them warm and they can't keep them dry in the ocean. So they have to get big enough to start getting their more adult plumage or adult feathers, so that they can stay warm and be able to go out in the ocean to find food. So until that time, the parents take care of them. And that varies a bit species to species of how that works. They will definitely feed from their parents' crop, which is that, I think we talked about this a little bit with some of the other birds. They have a special organ in their throat that helps store some food. But penguins will kind of swallow fish and partially digest it in their crop, and then they can feed that to the babies when they get back to shore. Now, some parents, both of them will be doing double duty, and one will take care of the chicks and one will go get food, and then they'll switch places. Others, they kind of do it a little differently. And one of the most unique of all animals that does this is the emperor penguin, because they actually lay their eggs miles and miles and miles, like 50 to 100 miles from the shore. And since they can't fly, that means that they march or walk all those miles inland. In parts of Antarctica, if the snow and ice is the right condition, they'll sometimes slide on their belly if it's a little hill, but if it's uphill, they have to walk. So it takes them a while to do that walk. Once they get to their breeding grounds, they'll pair up with their mate, who they usually have all their life. The female penguin will then lay an egg, and the male will put it on his feet and rest the egg up on his feet so that it stays warm and off of the ice. And then she takes off. She goes back to the ocean to get some food. And she's gone for just over 2 months. And during that time, he doesn't leave anywhere. He stays there, and he keeps that egg warm, and he incubates it sitting on top of his feet, between his feet and his lower feathers that help keep it really warm. And he stays there through the coldest, winteriest part of Antarctica. And he stays there with all the other dad emperor penguins and keeps that egg warm until it hatches. And about the time it hatches, he has one little meal left for the baby penguin in his crop, and he can feed that to the baby when he hatches. And then he's hoping that the mama penguin shows back up. And she usually does, unless she's unfortunately been eaten by something bigger. Then there's some problems that go on. But she'll show up and she'll bring food to the baby, and then the dad will take off and go hunting, and then they'll trade places again a little bit later. So when they have babies, emperor penguins and king penguins, they're the biggest two. They usually only have one chick. Some of the smaller penguins have 2, and on rare occasions 3 chicks, especially some of those like the little blue penguin. They can have more chicks because they're going every day to get food. And they have a little home at the beach that they make into the hillside, into the dirt. So they'll dig a little burrow and they'll keep the babies in there. So it's easier to keep a couple babies safe when you have some shelter to help protect them. Penguins also have extraordinary communication abilities. Now, with some of those penguins in Antarctica where they're nesting and where they're having their babies, there are hundreds of thousands, and in some cases millions of penguins all together in one big space. And penguins, they kind of all look alike. I know from having worked at the aquarium where we have penguins, it's really difficult to tell them apart just by looking at them. And so those baby penguins and the parent penguins learn each other's voice. They each have unique voices, and they'll be able to listen and hear that specific voice out of the whole flock of the penguins. And through that communication, they know who their baby is, they know who the parent is, and they'll be able to find each other to make sure that the baby gets food. Now, while they're hunting out in the ocean to get their food, they can hold their breath for about 20 minutes, which is really amazing for a bird. If you think about other birds, they probably aren't able to hold their breath much at all, other than some diving ducks and other seabirds. Most other birds wouldn't have a real need to hold their breath, but to hold their breath for 20 minutes, that's very impressive of a penguin. That's a lot longer than I can hold breath, and probably a lot longer than you can too. Now, while they're out in their ocean hunting for food, they may have some predators that would try to eat them. Penguins, because of their size, are very middle of the food chain. So there's a lot of things bigger than them that might try to eat them. In Antarctica, in that cold water space, that's going to be things like orcas and a great big seal called a leopard seal. There are some other seals that would also try to eat them. And then when they're babies there would also be some other seabirds that would try to eat them. Things like petrels and skuas. And in different areas, I know in Africa, there's some pelicans that come after the baby penguins. In places in Australia, there's foxes that will come after the babies when they are on the land. And so they have a wide range of predators in different spots. One other thing that I read about penguins that I thought was super fascinating, they have a special gland in their body that when they drink seawater, as they're catching fish, they're going to get some seawater in them. They have a special gland by their eye that helps them get the salt out, because that's too much salt, it would make them sick. So that actually helps process their the water as it goes into their body and excretes the salt out and then pushes it out by their eyes. So they kind of get salty little boogers, and that like flakes off of their by their eye, but it helps them to be able to safely drink seawater essentially, which is pretty impressive. Now, in talking a little bit about penguins, we said that they all live south of the equator, so they are pretty much everywhere. There's a species of penguin down there, if you're far enough south. So in South America, there's two different technically three. So there's the Galapagos penguins that live on the Galapagos Islands. And then there's some penguins that live on the coast of Chile and Argentina called Magellanic penguins. And there's some across the way on the Argentina side called Humboldt penguins. So in South America, there's those three. Over in South Africa, there's a species that are called the African penguins. And then over in Australia, that's where we can find our friends, the little blue penguins. And over in New Zealand as well. And then there's also some in New Zealand called the Fiordland penguins and the yellow-eyed penguins, which are all cool species. And then in some of those other rocky areas and other islands off those big continents, they would also have things like the rockhopper penguins. And then further south by the Antarctica, you would find some of those cold weather penguins, the emperors, the kings, the gentoos, the adeles, and the chinstrap penguins. Those would all be a little further south where it's cold and snowy. Now, of all these species, of all these 18 species of penguins, 10 of those 18 are threatened or endangered. And so penguins are some of the most threatened groups of seabirds in the world. And there's a lot of reasons that they're having some trouble out there. And guess who's to blame for it? People! We're always to blame. Why? Because we don't have enough respect for the planet and the other animals who live here, and we cause a lot of problems. So some of the problems we cause for penguins, one of the biggest is that we're overfishing. So in places where we're taking too much fish at one time, or too much of one kind of fish or other types of seafood, we're sometimes causing problems with their food source. Also, there's problems with fishing gear where penguins are getting trapped inside nets or abandoned fishing line or fish hooks that can all cause them health problems. Now, as a bird, they have to be able to come up and get a breath at the surface. So if they get stuck in a fishing net and they're pinned under the water for a long time, they can't get up within 20 minutes. They're not going to be able to get a breath, and that's going to be the end of that bird. There's also some problems caused by diseases of people or animals that people may have with them. If they go to some of those remote areas, especially some of the islands or Antarctica, we can cause problems just by being there. If we have a cold or something, it could possibly transfer to the penguins. Now, another big problem with them, because they are ocean-dwelling birds, if there are oil spills. So that's a big problem with a lot of different animals in the ocean, particularly birds and mammals in the ocean. That can be a big problem if there's oil spills, because that oil can get into their coat or their feathers, and cause a lot of problems, because then to try to remove it, they might eat it accidentally, and that'd be very bad for their digestive system. But it can also just cause problems in killing off their prey species, and also cause problems by making it not possible for them to waterproof or insulate their feathers or fur correctly. So oil spills are a big problem. And the last big problem that people are causing is climate change. Yes, I'm gonna talk about that a little bit. As temperatures around the globe are warming, we're seeing problems in areas where there's a lot of snow and ice that are melting faster or more each year than they have in previous time frames. And some of those, there was a colony of emperor penguins, the biggest ones, that live in Antarctica. And in 2017, one of their important nesting sites that was built on sea ice, not on the land part of Antarctica, but on the ice part of Antarctica, that big chunk of sea ice broke off in 2017. And so when that happened, it started rocking and rolling on the ocean and started floating further away from Antarctica with the penguins on it. Now, the adult penguins, they were fine. They could go, hey, baby, this is my dog. They could go and swim and go catch food and be fine. But unfortunately, this was during their chick breeding season. And so they had some chicks on there, and it was estimated that about 10,000 plus emperor penguin chicks died that year when that chunk of sea ice broke off. And that was caused because the planet is getting warmer. So that's something that we can all do a little better to help, specifically by how we consume our energy. Things like gasoline or coal or natural gas cause a lot of gas in the air, and that causes temperatures to warm around the globe, and it causes the ocean to get warmer, and it causes air temperatures to be warmer, and then that causes ice and snow to melt in places where it shouldn't be melting. And when that happens, it causes a lot of problems for a lot of those animals who rely on those places. So easy ways we can do to kind of help make that a little better is watch how we consume our energy. So we're all doing that right now by staying home. That's a big help. But once we can move around out in the world again, if we do things like carpool or ride a bike or ride a bus or buy a car that uses electricity instead of gas, those can all help. Also doing things like turning off lights when you're not using them, or unplugging things that you're not going to use for a while. All of those can help. We can all do a little bit better. Sorry, my dogs are playing around out here. You might see or hear them in this video. They're having a good time because it's not raining right now. Well, I hope you've enjoyed what I've shared with you today about penguins. I hope you've learned some new things. I'll be putting up some other stuff on the Facebook profile later on today. And a special shout out today to Penguins International. They are a conservation program that is doing a lot of really good work to help people learn more about penguins and to help save penguins, and work with different governments around the world to make sure there's safe measures in place to protect penguins in their natural habitat. So they're our special shout out. I'll be putting some stuff up about them as well. I hope you're enjoying these critter chats. Feel free to like, follow, subscribe, and share any of the content on Instagram, Facebook, or YouTube. And let your friends and family know that I've got some good stuff going on here on the Zoo Nerd profile. So until tomorrow, take care, have fun, be safe, and I'll see you then. Thanks.